Hello everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing good. So, this week, the topic that I'm going to talk about is Angular forms. So, let us get into this topic. So, we have all created forms in HTML. So, we all have a basement of what a form is. A form is used to do simple actions like getting information from a user, more or like for different purposes they are used, and they are an integral part of an application, a web application. So in Angular there are two types of forms. One is a reactive form, the another one is the template driven form. Reactive forms are something that is very integral to Angular. Everything in reactive forms happen from the component side of things more than the template. So it is very powerful. It is also considered to be very scalable, and if you want to create a very powerful and scalable form, then we can go for this reactive form. Template driven form is, on the other hand, is a very simple form, and it most of the things are controlled from the template end. If you want to just put up as a normal email sign up form, or any other forms which are really simple and can be done without much functionalities, then we can go with template driven forms. So let us see more more differences between them. Reactive forms are more explicit. They are created in component class, while template-driven forms are less explicit. They are created by directives. As I told, reactive forms originate from the component. All of the data that your the form model and everything are handled in the component of the application. And while template driven forms, everything happens in the template end, so very less features are handled from the component end. So most of the functions are handled by something called directives, which we learned in the previous lectures. And data model reactive is very structured. Reactive forms are very structured because we are creating from the component end. We will create a structured object. Whenever we are creating an instance of an object, it will be structured, right? We will have uh, all the instances of this, all the parameters for that variable to be sent to the constructor to create it. So it will be structured as well. While on the other end, template driven forms are not that structured. Predictability. In terms of predictability, reactive forms work in a synchronous manner, while template-driven form work in an asynchronous manner. Form validation in reactive forms, form validation is done through functions. This is more or like how you do form validation in JavaScript or normal. When you use normal HTML, you usually validate the forms using functions in the JavaScript. So that remains the same in reactive forms. But in template-driven forms, you can do simple form validations using directives itself directly from the template itself. You don't need to write any function to handle the validations in template driven forms, but they are limited. uh, uh, Stating the fact that it is simple, definitely it will be limited. It will not be so custom that you can do anything with the validation. Mutability, reactive forms are immutable, while template driven forms are mutable. Scalability, as I said, like reactive forms are really scalable. They have low level API access, but template driven form is just an abstraction on top of APIs. So it is not that scalable. It is just for a simple form. So we have known enough about both these types of forms. For less First, let us start with a simple one, which is the template driven forms. So the form that I am going to create right now is will have three input fields and a submit button, and it'll this form will have a form validation from the template end. Since this is a template driven forms, the validation will be from the for template end itself. And if there is any error, we are going to display an error message there. And we are going to display the error message in such a way that it is very obvious to the user that something is going wrong. So let us see how we can accomplish this using template driven forms of Angular. First of all, create a new project. That's really funny, right? Like we can't do anything without starting a project. So that is self-explanatory. You have to create a form. So ng new, which can be done using the command ng new Angular forms. The next one is you have to create a form. You have to create a form model. For that, form model is generally TypeScript class that will have mm, all the variables for the corresponding input fields of your forms. So for to create a hero model, to create a form model, all you have to give is ng generate class and the class name. Here we have given hero because this is the hero form. So in our form there are going to be 4 fields, which is ID, name, power, and alter ego. So I have in the constructor we have given the we have declared four variables: public ID, which will be of type number; public name, which will be of type string; public power, which will be of type string again; and alter ego, which is nothing but it's an optional input field, so we have to add question mark. For the other three things are required fields, so we didn't add any question mark in that. So this is also going to be a type of type string. So this is the form model that we are going to use. We are just going to map all the values from the input field to these variables in the model. So that's why we are creating the corresponding variables. Next, as usual, we have to create a form component. Even though the template driven forms are like most of the things are done in the template, we have some things that still we handle from the component end. So the component name is hero form component, and we have powers like really smart, super flexible, and it is stored in an array. So main part is coming here. So we are creating an instance of the form model class that we created right now. So just like how you create object in any object oriented programming languages, all we have to do is new and the class name, and you're giving the parameters, which is nothing but, since it has a parameterized constructor, you need to give all the parameters to in instantiate an object. So we are giving an ID 18, and then we are giving the name Dr. IQ, and we are going to give it the first power from this array, and then we are going to give an alternative name. So we are creating a new object, and we are storing inside model. And this is it in this slide. The only thing that we are doing specific to this form is this creating an instance of the form model. And then so this will be the default field. So this will be the default field. So when you start, if you instantiate values like this in the model, I mean in the component, these values will be displayed on default. If you want to change, and when you change the value, it will come and store over here. So I'll be explaining that in the coming slides. The other things are these things are on submit is nothing but an event. It's a submit event, uh, which I will be talking later. And the next one is we have created a form model. We have created an instance of an object in the form component. Now we have to import forms module in the app module. So first we have to import forms module from Angular forms, so which is an inbuilt module, and then inside the ng module decorator function you have to, and inside imports you have to add that forms module, so that you can use the functionalities of this module. If you can remember, if you remember from previous slides, I told that we can use two-way binding ng model only if we have forms module. So that time we didn't cover forms, and now now since I'm covering forms, you can understand that the forms module has that ability of doing two-way binding using ng model. So in this in the app module, all you have to do is import forms module, and then in the ng model decorator function imports, you have to add it. That's it. So we have created created a form model. We have we have created an instance of that form model in the component so that it will by default it will display those details, and we have imported and added forms module in the components in the module. Now next, this is the form component, so we have to display it in the app component. For example, this is a simple app, so we are going to display it from the app component. To display the form, all you have to do is you have to add app hero form. This is the selector of our component. It is not mentioned here, but the app components selector is app hero form. So we will use the app hero form selector inside the app component HTML so that we can display the form. Then let us start creating the input fields, uh, input fields in the template. So this is so we are creating a div name container, and inside that we are giving the heading hero form, and inside that we are creating two input fields. The first one is name. The second one is alter ego. The first one is a required field, so we have to add a required in the input field, and the second one is an optional field, so we don't add any required in the optional input field. The third one is we are creating a submit button, so button type submit. So nothing in this is specific to Angular. This is normal HTML. So the only thing that we are doing is this: we are creating two input fields. Next, so we have created two input fields, and next we are adding another input field. Since it is using one of the Angular feature, I have recorded it separately. So this is the third input field, which is power. So power, we are I think, can you guys name the this functionality? I mean, what this is called ng4 in Angular? I think you have guessed correctly. So it is called a structural directive. So ng4 is one of the structural directives which allows you to iterate over a iterable object like an array. So we have powers, which is an array. We have powers which has 4 values. So this is going to be a drop down field. So we are using the select class just like HTML, and uh, we have to if it is an HTML, you have to create a separate option tag for each of the options. But here, since we have the structural directive ng4, you just need to give the variables based on which you have to iterate. So you are iterating one by one the powers, and then you are inserting it into the drop down with this is called the data binding, as you know, and you have to give inside the value so that it has the value of each option has a value of it. And then so we have added three fields and a button. So we are almost done with the HTML part. Now, in this we have used one Angular feature which I already taught in previous classes, and then now we are going to use two-way binding. This is the main part. So, template-driven forms relies totally on two-way binding. So this two-way binding I taught already just to show the features of Angular, but the main place where it is used is in template-driven forms. So let us convert our input name field into ng model. So for two-way binding, so all you have to add is ng model is equal to model.name, and then you have to give it a name. ng model.name, model, as you remember, is a is the object or object of the form model. So we are using that, and dot name is the value inside the object. So we are accessing that. So this means that two-way binding should happen for this field should happen with the name field of name variable of the model. So we are mapping model.name to ng model so that whenever the changes can go from form to component and from component to form. From form to component, when a user changes value, it will be registered in the component, and then from the component, if you do programmatically, you change the value, it will also be reflected in the template. So that's what two-way binding does. And then I think you should remember this also. I think I explained this in last or before class, that this is a template reference variable. So for form, we have to give a template reference. We are giving a template reference variable called hero form, and then we are mapping it to ng form, so we can use all the functionalities of ng form. Just like ng module, we have ng form, which refers to a module which has all the functionalities of form. So we have to do this, and then I think the next feature of template driven forms is control states. Control states only allow us to add the form validation output. Um, so there are 6 control states based on the functionalities. So ng touched, ng untouched. So if the input element has been clicked or touched, then it'll be the state of that input element will be ng touched. If it has not been touched or touched, it will be like untouched, ng untouched. And if a value of an input field is changed, then it will become ng dirty. If a value of an input field has not been changed, it is ng pristine. And then if a value of an input field is valid, it will be ng valid. If a value of an input field is invalid, it will be ng invalid. So these control states can be really useful, and you can do some actions based on the states of these input fields. For example, valid and invalid will be very useful based on if the input field has invalid data, then you can just use this data, and you can do some action based on it. I'll go in depth in the next slides. So now you guys may have a doubt, like how can we know which state an input field is? That is a good thing to get that question. So to do that, all you have to do is you have to add a template reference variable called, or whatever name you want to give, you can give that, and you can access it by using a decorator, by using inside a decorator, and you can use the template reference variable dot last name. All you have to do is you have to access the dot last name property of this template reference variable, so that you can print what state the input field is in. So this is really handy, right? I mean, you can directly know the state of an input field, and you can do specific actions on that. In that case, template reference variable is a very useful feature for us to. It is just like inserting a pin inside a field, so that you can you can use it later. So it is a very useful feature, template reference variable, and all you have to do is you have to check the class name, so that you can do any action based on that. And now we know what state the input field is, but based on that state, we might need some actions. For example, if the input field is invalid, we might need to change the color of the text box to show that the input is invalid. For example, field is password, where the minimum length should be 8, but the user enters only six characters, and it goes to the next field. In that case, we can use this data, and you can show the red color, so that he knows that it is invalid. So you can use this control states, which we learned in the last slide, ng valid of required. This means if a required field is valid, only this applies to, you can access in both ways, either ng valid of required like this, just like an object, or this is also, these are like two types of how you can, this is like more of an array, this is more like an object, but you can access both ways. And you can just give, if it is valid, you can just give a green line this side, And then if it is, you can use a control state variable invalid. If it's invalid, you can just give border left red color. So this is invalid. So we are going to give a green color if it is a valid and required field, and we are not going to give any color if it is a valid and optional field, and we are going to give red color irrespective of whether it is if it is invalid, and irrespective of whether it is required or optional, we are going to give red color. And now we have shown the color, so we have to show the message as well, so that um, user can know what is going wrong in that input field. So for that, uh, let us do that for the name field, because name is a required field. So to add error messages to a field, the thing you have to do is we have to add a div, and then you're using property binding called hidden. So first, if it is valid, or if it is untouched, if it is unchanged, then you have to keep it hidden. So I am keeping it in hidden state. Hidden is equal to name.valid and name.pristine. So if name is valid or name is pristine, then it will be in hidden form. If any one of it is not, like it is not valid or it is not pristine, then this hidden will become 0, and then this name is required will be printed. Highlight major is like bootstrap classes, so it will be applied directly. So in this part, what I'm telling is, you can add a error message over here itself. As you see in template driven form, you can add a error message or in a template itself. Instead of handling it in JavaScript, you are just adding one div, and then you are hiding it based on the state of the input field. And if anything goes wrong, if it becomes invalid, you are just removing the hidden and it is displayed. So this is so simple that you can do everything in the template end itself, instead of going to JavaScript and then you're instead of checking the field and then do reacting, you can directly react over here itself. I told in the first slide that we can use the directives. This is the way that you can use directly in the directives instead of going to the JavaScript file and checking it. And the final one is submit. So we can use ng submit. In Angular, we use ng submit. Since this is an event, we are enclosing it inside a parenthesis. And ng submit equal to, you are mapping it to a function. If the form is submitted, what function it has to execute. That is given as on submit. And then this one I already explained in the previous slides. And you can also do like disabled. We can use the disabled property, and then you can use the control state of valid. If the form is not valid, you can keep the submit button disabled in the disabled state, so the user cannot click submit. So in this way, you can make use of this special feature of Angular called control state variables, and you can do various actions. So let me summarize. Template driven form. To create a template driven form, basically you need to have a form model where the values are mapped from input field to the component class. I mean the class model. So whatever fields you are creating in the template, you can just have the corresponding variables in the class. And if it is an optional field, then you can have a question mark for that variable. Next, once you create the model, you can create an instance of instead of that model, so that these values will be displayed on default. Then based on the user input, it will get changed and it will be updated over here. And then to use all the two-way binding and all those features, you have to import a forms module, and you have to add it into the imports of ng module decorator function, so that you can use the two-way binding later. And since we will be using app component, we just need to have the selector. So this is like I am explaining this for example, but I think this is understood. Like we have to add the selector, and then we are creating an HTML HTML input field. So there is nothing new in this. It is plain HTML. There is no Angular to explain. And then we can make use of structural directors like ng-for. ng-for, instead of individually adding options, you can just use ng-for and give one statement. And two-way binding, this is a very important feature of template-driven forms. So the only way the template-driven form is connected to the component is through two-way binding. That is through ng model, and your model is the model object that you created. You can map it to the corresponding variables. If it is name, you can give model.name based on the variable name that you have created in the model. If it is power, you will map it to model.power, and then you have to give a name. And then we have to give a template reference variable hero forms that and map it to ng forms that use all the properties of ng form. And then now we are introducing two-way binding to power as well. ng model is equal to model.power. I told, right? For if it is power, it is in model.power. If it is name, it is in model.name. And this one, this one I explained in the last slide. And control state is a very important feature in template driven form that you have to use. So we have 6 states like ng touched, ng untouched, ng dirty, ng pristine, ng valid, and ng invalid. You can check that using a template reference variable and using the class name on the template reference variable. And then you can use those states to do a custom styling. And then you can use the you can hide or you can show or hide a error message based on the control state variables. If it is valid or pristine, you have to keep it hidden. If once it is not valid, it will directly be displayed. Instead of handling in the JavaScript, here you can directly handle in the template itself. That's a very good feature of template driven forms. And then to submit a form, you have to give ng submit, and then you can map to any function in your component. We already have ng on submit, which is this submitted is equal to true. That is a simple thing. If you want to do something else also, you can do on submit. If you want to send it to a backend to store it also, you can do. And then you can also disable the submit button based on the control state variable as whether form is valid or not. So this is all about template driven forms. Template driven forms does the trick when your requirements of a form is very simple and you wanted to get it done quick without any complexities, and you know that it will not be scaled in future. In that case, template driven forms are comes handy, and it is definitely better than the HTML forms because you have the structural directives and control state variables and all those. Please make use of it if you want a simple form. So based on your needs only, you can choose the type of form. I will be explaining reactive forms in the next class. Please feel free to add any doubts in the comment section if you have any. And then till then, see you. Stay safe. Bye.